Hello everyone, welcome to our Tuesday Live at 5 sew along. First of all, I wanted to share with you again classes that we have coming up in July. So you have the option of coming to the shop and taking the class or taking the class from home via Zoom. So I had put the class samples on, oh my goodness, now I gotta find it. There it is, on the internet or on the picture so you could see them and we could talk a little bit about them. This one is called Toolless Triangles. It is scheduled for Saturday, July 9th. We do have a couple of people, or I don't remember how many, but we have several people signed up for that. But we're looking for more to fill this class. It takes a 60-degree ruler, and it can be several different brands. And you also, I just used a stack of fat quarters in bright colors. So that is coming up. The next one is the hearts. This I call Charmed Hearts. You can make just one block if you want to just try it out and see if you like the technique. And that one is Friday, July 15th. So that's coming up. You can make the whole thing. I do have borders on mine now, but when I took this picture, I didn't have borders yet. This one is the V-block lanterns, and it is Thursday, July 21st. So all of these still have openings. This one is called the Ruby Star Cascade, and it's Saturday, July 30th. Takes a couple of jelly rolls, and that makes a generous throw size quilt. You could actually make a smaller one with just a single jelly roll. And then this one is called, hang on, I gotta grab the right thing. This one is Morning Star, and that's a traditional block. That's the name of the traditional block. And it is, you have two choices of times to take this one. It's Saturday, July 16th or Wednesday, July 27th. So all the classes are $30 plus the cost of your fabric. And you, of course, don't have to make the whole project. I know a lot of people don't want a whole big project, but they want to learn the technique. So you can do that with some scraps of fabric or a handful of fat quarters to play with, and then you'll have learn the techniques. And once you sign up, then I'll be emailing the supply list and the tool list, so you'll know what tools you might need. So if you are planning on signing up, you need to sign up soon because some of the classes are filling because we are limited in space here, so we want everyone to have the chance to take them. And what I tell people is take as many classes as you can. You learn something from every class. Sometimes you learn, I don't want to do that, and that's a valid thing to know. So something to think about. So today we're going to be going on with our project for our duck, goose. And the reason I named it that is because we're going to have several duck or goose or turkey or chicken. We have several blocks or pieces of blocks that we're going to use that have those names. So this was kind of what we had done so far. And notice there's some blank spaces because we haven't revealed what's going to be there. So our center medallion block started with some flying geese and made it in a triplet. And then you could also make the wild goose chase block with that. And then we had the pieced border. You had your choice of a scrappy version, which is on the left, or a planned version, which is on the right. And so tonight we're going to be working on the center medallion. I've got to find the right thing to grab. So we're going to be adding corners to this. Now this is a simple corner. We're going to have a couple of options, but this corner is the shaded 4-patch. So we're going to be talking about how you do that and how you could jazz that up and make it something even a little bit more interesting and different. So we're going to talk first of all about shaded 4-patch. That's a technique that you can get the technique sheet that explains the process If you have the technique sheets up on the top, it's going to give you a indicator of what tool it goes with. This happens to be the Tucker trimmer. And it gives you a level of difficulty indicator. The stars represent how difficult maybe that block is. But don't let that scare you. If you want to try that, there are good YouTube tutorials that you can watch, and you can sit there with your technique sheet. It gives you the written information, text to explain the process, gives you pictures of graphics to show you how to orient your tools, and then there's sizing information for several different sizes. Now the shaded 4-patch can actually be made with the Tucker trimmer 1, 2, or 3. We're going to be using only the Tucker trimmer 1. And so for tonight, our block has to match up, and let me get the unit here and show you with this camera. Let's see. We used the triplets, and I have actually put my center square with a couple of my triplets. So that's my center row. But our shaded 4-patch has to match in this corner here, because this is going to be here like this. So when I get my shaded 4-patch unit done, it has to fit here. That means that I'm making a shaded 4-patch that's going to finish at 4.5 inches, but you're going to actually be trimming to a 5-inch shaded 4-patch. So I already have my sizing information about what I need to cut and what I need to stitch. So I have all my pieces cut here. I've got some squares, some rectangles, and I've got some bigger rectangles. And that information will be on the handouts. So I actually have 3-inch squares and a 3x4-inch rectangle. And I'm going to stitch, this is going to be, let me just kind of show you again what fabric is going to end up and where it's going to end up. This, the square in the corner that shows in green, that's your small square. The small triangles that show in kind of a yellow-green, a pale color, and then the corner triangles, which are the bigger triangles, and it shows in red. So my version is going to have a cream-colored square in the corner. It's going to have some small triangles out of my gold, and then my big triangles will be blue. So you can put whatever color you want, and the instruction sheet that tells you what to cut tells you where those pieces are going to go, so you can plan for that. Oh, I forgot to turn off my light. Hang on a second. It's easier to sew with the light on, but then you can't see as well. So let's turn that off, and then we'll be ready to stitch. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is take my rectangle, my small rectangle, and my square, and I'm going to stitch those together, just one after the other. Now, on the technique sheet, it does explain a process for doing this where you actually do some strip piecing, and so a long strip that's this wide to a long strip that's this wide, and then you cut it into segments. I tend to just grab my squares and rectangles and just stitch them one after the other, but you can do either one. I especially like to do rectangles to squares when I'm making a scrappy version, which is often the case. So that's another reason why I typically don't do the strip piecing technique, but you sure could if you're making several of the same color combinations. So I am going to make 4 shaded 4-patch units. So I need 4 squares and 4 small rectangles in order to do that. So once I get that done, I'm going to grab my fabric tag and sew onto my fabric tag so I can cut these apart. Now once you get that done, you're going to press away from the square, and I'm just going to give it a quick little finger press. So just press toward the rectangle on all 4 of those units. So I'm just going to get those finger pressed and creased. You want to press away from the square. It's going to make your life easier on the next step. Then once you get that done, I'm going to combine 2 of my units. Let me back it out so you can see. I'm going to combine 2 of these, and I'm going to flip one so I get what I call a wonky 4-patch, because you want those squares to be opposite each other. And it almost doesn't matter whether the square feeds through or the rectangle feeds through first. You just want to be consistent and do it the same on all of your units that you're making, because it just makes it easier when it's time to trim and do the next step. So I'm just going to just feed these through using my 1/4 inch. I'm using my patchwork foot and stitching along the edge, and my edges of my 2 units are just lined up. I'm just matching those up. Notice I didn't pin anything. You can if you want to, but sometimes I feel like when I try to pin things, I make it distorted, so I often don't. So I'm going to do the next one. I'm going to line up that long side and stitch. Once you get that done, then you grab your fabric tag and park your needle again. It's a good habit to get yourself into if you're not in the habit of using a fabric tag. So now I've got 2 of my wonky 4 patches. That's what I want. And I'm going to, let me see if I can make this work a little better. Let's scoot in just a little bit so you can see a little more. All right, so I want to press this so that it presses away from the square. But that makes it kind of a challenge because of this seam. The easiest way to do that is fold this in half and give it a little clip right here. And I try to clip 1 thread past the stitching. If you clip 2 threads past the stitching, that's okay. But that makes it lay down nice and flat, and that the seam will flip and it'll go the direction you need it to go, so that you can have your seam down the center pressed away from your squares. And that's what you want. So just real quickly take your scissors, give it just a little snip right there in the center so it'll lay down flat. Now we're going to take this to the overhead so I can press that with the iron and actually give it a nice little crease, and I'll show you the next step. So again, I'm going to open this up and I'll give it just a little finger crease, pressing away from my square, and we're going to just set the iron on it, let the iron do the work. And if you're going to use the acorn pressing pin, now would be a good time to use it. And I am just going to give it a quick swipe going both ways, because I did not bring that first seam to the iron and press it with the iron. So I can do that now. Give it just a quick little swipe both directions and just set the iron on and let the iron do the work. And it doesn't take a lot of the acorn pressing solution. Sometimes the fabric, it's very noticeable when you've used that, and sometimes the fabric is a color that you just don't see the acorn pressing solution on your fabric. So now here I'm going to do my next step. And this is a step where I'm going to actually pair up this rectangle with one of my rectangles that actually ends up being that triangle. This big rectangle is the one that ends up being the big red triangle on the corners. Mine, of course, will be blue. And I'm going to buddy this up. And you actually don't have to layer them to do the drawing of your lines, but just to show you what's going together. Now I need to draw 2 lines between my squares, but I can't just grab my magic wand and do that because it has to have a specific angle. And I should have used a thread that you could see. Let me see if I can make the line of the thread show, because you need to be able to see what I'm looking at. You're going to be making a diagonal line, and you want it to go right at the crisscross of those two seams. Let me mark this side too so you can see. I should have thought about that before I put the cream color thread in. Of course, normally I'm using cream or gray on almost anything anyway, but now I've got thread there so you can see those two lines of stitching. I want to make sure that when I draw my line, it goes across between the squares and it hits that intersection. The other thing I'm looking for is the angle from this line to my drawing line. And I'm going to be using a ruler that has a 45-degree mark on it. I'm looking for that 45-degree mark, and that's going on one of my lines of stitching. Here, you can see this one better than you can see the one on that's lower. Here's a 45-degree line, and I'm looking at this line right here. Let me do it again, 45 degrees, and I want to hit right there. Now I've got a friction pin. I'm going to use one of these that makes a little darker line so you can actually see it. So once you have your 45-degree line on your ruler lined up on that seam, you can draw across and cross over that intersection. Now, I have, you may or may not, let me see if I can make the camera go down here. It may or may not come to the corner. It may come kind of off of the corner. That's fine. It's still going to work just fine. Then I'm going to flip it around, and we're going to put the 45-degree line on the seam. I've marked it with my blue pen so you can actually see it. And I want to hit that intersection where the two seams crisscross. And again, it may or may not come to that corner. Now, sometimes it looks like this part of the space between the two lines is a little farther apart than this part. That's okay. It's still going to work just fine. So I've got that one ready. Let's get the other one ready. Again, I want that 45-degree line on my seam. So I'm going to put it on my seam. I want to cross over the crisscross. Let me get tighter so you can maybe see what I'm seeing. There's my seam. I'm putting my 45-degree line on that. There's my crisscross where the two seams intersect, and that's where I want that line to go. This particular unit has several names. I've heard it called Cats in the Cradle. I've heard it called Mary's Magical Triangles. There's lots of different names for it, but Shaded Four Patch is kind of the old traditional name. There's my seam. There's my intersection. That's what I'm looking for. And I'm looking for a 45-degree angle from that seam to my line, to the edge of my ruler. So there's my two lines. Now, when I stitch, I want to make sure that I stitch on that line or toward the inside of the line. I don't want to go on the outside of the line, because if I do, I'm chopping off the corner of my unit. Same thing here. I want to stitch on the line or a thread on the inside, not on the outside of the line, because that's going to chop off that corner. So notice on this one, I did not layer my big rectangle when I drew my lines. And that's perfectly fine, because now I can layer it and be ready to stitch it. So let's come over to the machine, and I've got my rectangle and my wonky 4-patch layered. This is a good time to use the fabric tag if you're not in the habit of that, because if a machine is going to eat the corner of your fabric, this is where it would eat it. When you're feeding a corner through, this makes it life so much easier. We're going to stitch right down, and I'm looking for that intersection right there. We're just going to come down closer to the needle so you can see what I'm seeing. So I'm stitching on my line, and when I get to that intersection, I want to make sure that I'm stitching either right on that line or a thread on the inside. I don't want to go on the outside of that line. Say that again. Oh yes, Tony said it's time to clean your machine. And it is. She's showing off because she cleaned hers over the weekend. It is time, and I'm going to clean mine Saturday when we have the vacuum cleaner out. So there's my point that I'm looking for. But it is time to clean your machine and oil it according to your machine manufacturer's directions. That'll just make your machine last longer. Mine is making a little noise, which means it's time to clean it. Yes, depending on what you're stitching on or what you're stitching with, some threads are more linty than others, and they'll cause more lint in your bobbin area than others. There's where I'm headed right there. But if you get yourself in the habit of cleaning it at least once a month, you'll be happier, your machine will work better, and depending on how much you sew, you may have to clean it more often. So now we're going to stitch to the other one. And by the way, if you are watching via YouTube, because I do post these on YouTube after they air, make sure you subscribe. That just helps the algorithms tell the Facebook people and the YouTube people that you are watching. And if you have buddies that are quilters, be sure and share with them. All right, so I've got my stitching done. I'm going to go to the ironing surface overhead so you can see what we're going to do next. So the tool that we're using to do the trimming on this unit is the Tucker trimmer. And it's my go-to tool. I use it to cut squares, half-inch squares and whole-inch squares. Anything up to a 6.5-inch square you can cut easily with this. And actually you can cut a 7-inch square. The number 7 is not on there, but this tool is a 7-inch piece of plastic. So that gives you a quick way to cut squares. So I'm going to cut between my lines of stitching. If it is important to you that you have only 1/4 of an inch of seam allowance in here, then you need to put a 1/4 inch line of your ruler on your seam. I'll do that on this one. I've got the 1/4 inch line on my seam. So there's one of them, and then I'm going to turn it around and do the same thing on this one. I'm putting the 1/4 inch line on my seam. Once I do that, notice I have this little sliver left over. So if it's important to you that this be an accurate 1/4 inch in here, you want to do it that way. If, like me, it doesn't matter that much what's on the back, because I'm more interested on what's on the front, I'm just going to cut it apart, because you're never going to see that part back there and know that it's wider. Now, if I'm doing competition quilting, say I want to enter this in some big show, I would certainly trim out the excess. But for a lot of quilts that I'm using the shaded 4-patch on, they're going to be user quilts or donation quilts. I just cut them between the lines, and I don't worry too much about it. Notice I've got my point. When you open that, you get a nice shaded 4-patch unit. It's oversized the way we like them here, because I can trim that down and I get great results that way. So I'm going to give these all a quick little press. And you have on your technique sheet the instructions for what to cut. And we're ready to trim. So I've got my units ready to go. With the Tucker trimmer, it is specifically designed to trim half squares, whole squares, 1/4 squares, and squares that have diagonal seams. Now this one actually has a point here. There's one diagonal seam, but I want to make sure that that point lines up right in the center. So this is a 4.5 inch finished unit, so I need to trim it to 5 inches. All I have to do is put the 5-inch line on that long seam and make sure that this cross mark hits that point of that corner. So I'm going to trim up and across, and I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to put the 5-inch line on the edge here and here, the 5-inch diagonal lines going on my seam, and my cross line is going right across the center. And also, notice I'm using the whole circle up at the top because I'm making a whole size, not a half size. Now, if you're left-handed, all you do is flip it and put this whole circle on the top left. Since I'm right-handed, I'm going to put it on the top right. Again, you want the number 5 line on your seam. Your cross line is going right on the corner of that square. We're going to trim up, over, and we're going to turn 180 degrees. Then the 5-inch marks are here and here. The 5-inch diagonal line is here, and your common line is right across the center. And I'm going to trim. And then I'm going to do that with all 4 of them because I need 4 corners. They need to be trimmed to 5 inches. Let me tweak that just a little. Line that up a little better there. And now we're going to line up on the same diagonal 5-inch line. My common line is going right across the point. And one more, and then I have my 4 shaded 4-patch units. So once you get that done, you could actually complete your block using this, and I'll show you what that might look like. I've got my center unit started where I've sewn those 2 pieces on, and this is what my block would look like if I went ahead and assembled it. So you have options. I want to show you a couple of different options you could think about. So this is our medallion pieces, but I could turn my shaded 4-patch this way. I had one turned wrong anyway, and nobody told me. So I could turn my shaded 4-patch this way. That is an option as well. So you could assemble the block this way. However, since this is a duck, duck, goose quilt, and all of my blocks, I said, are going to have something to do with ducks or geese or turkeys, I'm going to show you how you could make this into the duck and ducklings unit, these 4, but I'm actually going to do that next week. This is a project where I really don't expect that you'll be done ahead of time. I don't want to go too fast because I want to give you a chance to kind of process what we're doing, but I want to show you a picture of where I'm headed for this one. And the handout you'll get has some information if you're familiar with the corner pop tool. You may be ready to go ahead and do this next unit. So this is the shaded 4-patch corners. You could make the corners like this instead. This has the duck and ducklings corners, and I'll show you why it's called that. So notice that instead of having a whole square in the corner, there's a triangle there. And this one actually has a red big triangle, yellow small triangles, and then in the corner, instead of a square, there's a background and a color. And I'll show you kind of what I'm going to do with mine. This block is, let me bring that to the front. This block is called Duck and Ducklings. So you could take these 4-patch units, or shaded 4-patch units. You could turn them into the Duck and Ducklings unit, and then you could actually make the Duck and Ducklings block using that. So here's what I'm actually going to stitch on mine. Now, for some reason, it is blurry. But I'm going to actually pop off the corner of, hang on a second, let me see if we can get this to, it did this last week. Once it gets kind of, it loses its mind there for a second. So instead of having a corner that has all background, I'm actually going to replace it with a black triangle. And we're going to be talking about how to do that next week. It will use the corner pop tool. And we'll talk about what I do in order to get that triangle here on all my shaded 4-patch units, so that my project is, or my block is going to look more like that, of course, in my choice of colors. Now, I chose on this particular block for my medallion to have all 4 of my shaded 4-patch corners to be the same. And when I pop off the corners, I'm going to have 4 black triangles instead of 4 green. But you could certainly do it scrappy. So that is an option for you. Okay, so do we have questions I need to answer? Okay, Tony said to remind you that the classes that I showed at the beginning, those are real classes. You can do them via Zoom, or you can do them here at the shop. So if you live a long way away, there's no reason why you can't take a class with us. If you're local and want to come to the shop, we're excited to be able to come back to some sort of normal. So that's kind of where we're headed. Okay, so any other questions? All right. Well, next week we will show you how to take the shaded 4-patch unit and turn it into a duck and ducklings unit. The handout that I'll include this week will kind of show that and talk about what you need to cut for that, but I'll show you how to do that next week. So don't forget, we also have all of the tools, all of Deb's tools, all of her patterns, and I also design patterns using her tools. So you can find those on our website, SagerCreekQuilts.com. So come see us when you can. Until next week, happy sewing.